Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Actual Magician Explains, where today we're going to be taking a look at some of the foundational ideas of Kabbalah and taking a look at exactly what we need to know in order to look at the initiation system of the Western Esoteric Initiatory System. As a general introduction to Kabbalah and the history of Kabbalah, I'd like to briefly cover a quick overview of the original history of Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. The original impulse of Kabbalah emerged from a first century school of Jewish mysticism which was called Merkabah. It means chariot, and these mystics utilized secret methods of spiritual ascent, quite often contemplating the Hebrew letters in different combinations and variations, and they would enter a mystical state and visualize themselves as being taken or riding a chariot into the divine realms. These then became part of the Occult school, which means palace. And so we've gone from chariots to palaces, and the palaces refer to the spiritual planes through which the mystics ascend. The description of those journeys actually seem to bear similarities to the journey of the soul into the underworld depicted in the ancient Egyptian Book of Coming Forth by Day, or the Book of the Dead. And quite often there be magical words or appropriate names to be spoken before each door was passed and each palace entered. Out of this set of teachings and experiences, 3 classical texts eventually emerged that formulate the basic structure of traditional Kabbalah. Those are the Sepher Zohar, or the Book of Splendor, often called the Zohar. This was first printed between 1558 to 1560 and also 1559 to 1560. And the Sepher Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, which is of particular interest to us in the Western Esoteric Initiatory System because of its structuring of a tree of life and the Sephiroth and the Hebrew letters. So that's the Sepher Yetzirah, the Book of Formation, that was first printed in about 1562. And finally the Sepher Bahir, the Book of Light, which was printed in Amsterdam, first printed in 1651. So many of the later Kabbalistic schools formed around these 3 books, the Sepher Yetzirah, the Sepher Bahir, and the Zohar. The schools of thinking formed around Sepher, particularly as we're looking at it during the 16th century, and many of the leading thinkers of Kabbalah that came into the Western Esoteric Initiatory System were around during that time in the 16th century. And particularly the Rabbi Isaac Luria, called the Ari, lived between 1534 and 1572, and the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, who was around the same time, 1522 to 1570. And it's particularly the Lurianic school of thought that we get a lot of the ideas that developed into the Western Esoteric Initiatory System. So that's a brief overview. We could look at how Kabbalah came into Western Esotericism, but that's a topic for a different presentation. So let's take a look at an absolutely blank sheet of paper. So this is what we currently know about Kabbalah. And we're going to take a quick look at the way Kabbalah maps creation itself, and then we can take a look at how we use Kabbalah to map the initiatory journey back up the Tree of Life, perhaps in a separate video. So what we're going to do is imagine that this is everything. So we're already, when we talk about the top of the Tree of Life, we're talking about something very abstract and eternal nothingness that is everything, that is eternal light, that is suffusing everything. So there's no difference, so there's no way that we can talk about it because we are part of the something that is everything. So let's imagine that's represented by this blank piece of paper. Now, what happens with Kabbalah is that the everythingness withdraws a part of itself. So in order to make a somethingness that is required in the everythingness to know itself, to inquire into itself, it withdraws a part of itself. So in effect, that makes a circle or a sphere of existence or numerical emanation that is in fact here a contraction from the divine universe of everything. It's now made a difference. This is not it, but yet it is still within it, but it's contracted out of it. So again, we get very abstract and very paradoxical up at the top of the tree of life. Now, what happens then is out of that nothingness, that is an everythingness, there is a singular point that can then form within this contraction, within this withdrawal. And this in effect then unbalances the everythingness that is somethingness now. And that point extends in a line. So that point extends in a line. And now we've got the idea of extension coming from a point. So the universe is now not just a point, it's an extended point which forms a line. So now we can have not only difference, but we can have a scale of difference. And that in effect emanates another, what we all call a sphere, a Sephiroth. One of the Sephiroth, a Sephira in its singular form, which means a numerical emanation. So it's not a sphere, it's not a circle, it's a emanation and a numbered one. So this in effect is now the second, so we'll number them. So we have number 1 and number 2, and now we have a second facet of existence, but this is still within everythingness itself, even though it's now formed out of the contracted withdrawal point that was formed here. We now have something here. So this is the second emanation. We could have actually drawn it as a circle around the first emanation, and we could in fact draw all of these circles outwards because they are all emanating out of each other. They are all resonating to each other. But now you can see we have some sort of imbalance because we have a duality here that isn't sort of balanced in any way. So what happens is the divine influence then stretches out and it makes a third emanation across here, and then this can link back to the first one, and now we have a triad at the top of what is going to be our tree of life. And in effect the roots of the tree are actually here, and the branches come outwards all the way into manifest existence. But up here there's still nothing manifest, there's still no existence. There is only this triad that is in fact a trinity, but it is all the same thing. In effect it could be sort of 3 concentric circles emanating out of the first one. But we've divided them into these 3 forms so that we can see what's going on. But now in this third one we actually have the whole concept of a triangle. In effect we have an eye for singular 1 in a triangle here. So for those Illuminati fans amongst us, we have the sort of eye of individualness, the singular point within a triangle at the top of the what is going to be the tree of life. So we have form here. So we have energy, we have potential, we have energy, and we have form. So I'll just write those in. Potential, energy, and form or structure. And out of these 3 things, out of these 3 aspects, all creation comes. It can always be broken down into, is it energetic? Is it a pattern? Is it a form? Is it the matrix? Is it the structure of things? Or is it the energy that is the force that is actually animating within the structure? Now, we have this set of 3 things here cycling round, and what happens in effect is that they then flip a new construction out of themselves. Because they now have potential, because they have energy and structure, we can now actually start creating things. And out of this creation then comes a mirror form of it, which is immediately created out of these three. So in effect, if we were to number these, even though they are a similar trinity, it would be 4, 5, and 6. 4, 5, and 6. And we can see that that is now a manifest mirror across what we call an abyss, where up here there's no differentiation, even though we've differentiated it for our purposes, for our perception, because we're looking at this from a separative point of view. Then we have this abyss that is here, so we'll call this an abyss, and then we have a mirror version of existence here. Now this one, because it is a moving likeness of the eternity that's above, that is undifferentiated, we can call it time. So this is actually on the Tree of Life, Hesed, or time. This is really the Big Bang then that expands outwards. Now we have a mirror, we can actually expand outwards. And that starts expanding like crazy, and it expands into a new Sepher, which is Geborah, which is form and structure, a mirror of this one, in the same way that this energetic form is a moving likeness of this one. And that now starts to try and pattern and structure this into some sort of form, into some sort of pattern, mirroring what is going on from its original form up here. And in effect, those two things try and find a balance, and do find a balance, down in Tifereth, in beauty. The Hebrew word for beauty is Tifereth here. And I'll go through the names of the Sephiroth in a moment when we can understand what their formal structure actually is, what their basic foundational structure is. So we have 4, 5, and 6 as a mirror of 1, 2, and 3. And we can join these together if we want, although we are joining them across an abyss of understanding, of course. So we just draw them down in straight lines. Now, what happens here then is we have a mirror of the potential of the number 1 point, but now we've got a sort of singular point that is extended, that has this manifest triad above it. So again, that can now start to make another triad below it. And it's almost like this one is giving birth to this one in a way that this one reflected out into this one. But this is a more manifest creation. As we're dropping down the levels here, we're coming into more and more structure as these circles resonate outwards and interfere with each other like ripple patterns outwards. So now we have 7, 8, and 9, which is on the Tree of Life, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod, meaning foundation, because we're now coming down to a recursive pattern that has to somehow complete itself so it can return to the source and complete itself in a mirror of existence that is around it. So what happens is our number 9 point just drops down and makes like a pendant to number 10, which is Malkuth, the kingdom. So down to 10, which is Malkuth, the kingdom, which is in effect a pendant through this whole series, or the uppermost branch from the roots of QShTh that's at the top, the crown that's at the top. So we can sort of put a crown up here, and this is QShTh at the top of the Tree of Life, which means crown. So we have QShTh, we have Chokmah, which means wisdom, and we have understanding, which is the structural patterning of the energy and the wisdom of Chokmah. So we have QShTh, Chokmah, and Binah, and then we come down to Hesed and Geborah. Hesed and Geborah, which is the big expansion and the contraction, the form the structuralization of what is coming out of here. So this is love, and this is might and control, sort of trying to stop this from flooding the entire universe, because an overwhelming nature of hasteness would just cloy up the world, and everything would be a sea of love, but no structure, no relationship, no anythingness other than the blob of Hesed. And then Geborah is like trying to put the scaffolding and erect things and build things and structure it and channel everything so that it finds its balance in Tiferet, which is seen as the sun, or the son of Kether, and both sun as in S-U-N and S-O-N, because we have our sort of ideas of Christian mysticism that can be found in the sacrifice point of Tiferet from Kether, the divine above. Now, you'll notice these paths are forming, and so we can draw these paths in, and in effect these are forms of emanation or connection between each of these points that are now relating to each other as they resonate out, and they start to find these resonances amongst themselves until eventually we have the 22 connections or resonances that are the result of the interactions of these totally unknowable aspects of the creative force as it manifests. So we can't know these things directly, because in effect we are rising out of them, we are rising through them, we are rising within them. But we can know them through the aspects of the paths that connect them. So each of these 22 paths, which according to the Sepher Yetzirah relate to the 22 Hebrew letters, and then according to the Western Esoteric Initiatory System, we can then see that then that has a map to our 22 major arcana of the tarot. Coincidentally enough, then we can map the likely components of these, the likely functions of these, the likely lessons of those through the tarot cards on the Tree of Life, or through the Hebrew letters, or through an understanding of what these Sephiroth are actually doing. So let's just put it in Tiferet, meaning beauty, Netzach, and Hod, and Yesod, and Malkuth. So what have we got? We've got and Bina up here. So we basically got Kether, Hokmah, Bina, Hesed, Geborah, Tiferet, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malkuth. But you can see why I wanted to explain them as emanations first before we start dressing them up with surface words, surface attributions, and the correspondences that are then made to their attributions on the Tree of Life. We need to really understand them in relationship to each other and their service to the creative pattern of all existence. Because now what we can do with the Tree of Life is make a model of anything we want through just 10 emanations and the 22 paths, 32 emanations or paths in total. We can also add, I guess, Darth, which is in the middle here. This is something that sort of arises as a result of this weird flip that happens across the abyss. And Darth basically means, or Da'at basically means knowledge, but it's totally illusionary in the sense of it's only arising out of the relationship between Hokmah and Bina. It's a bit of an abstruse point, but Darth is a non-Sephira that has to exist in the same way that the negative veils of existence have to exist, from which everything then comes, even if it's very difficult to conceptualize any of these things. So Yesod, Tiferet, Darth, Kether, and Malkuth have a very interesting correspondence to each other up the tree of life, and particularly our own journey, which we are we make the idea, the notion that in effect we start our journey at the bottom because we want to come back through these resonances, these veils of existence, in order to come back to the true point in which we are currently already. All of this is happening everywhere, always, all at once, in the sense of the universal pattern actually manifesting through this at any given point. So we could take a look at the light that's above me and visualize it as the lightning flash coming down the tree of life, much like a lightning flash or a sword. Sometimes it's drawn as a sword of lightning coming down, and that's the creative process. So when we look at anything that we create, then we can model it coming down the tree of life through the Sephiroth. But when we go back up, it's seen as the journey of something that looks very similar to a snake going up the tree of life, snaking along every path. So we have to go up through the tree of life in terms of a path all the way from the bottom to the top. Okay, so that's a brief explanation of the structure and creative flow of the tree of life, and next we're going to take a look at how we can use this as one example of modeling reality. So let's take a look at that. What we're going to do is start at the bottom here, and I'm just going to remap for us that bottom part of the tree of life. Okay, so this is our bottom bit here of the tree of life. I've just drawn it out here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the tarot cards that correspond to the paths on these. And this is why in occultism we learn the correspondences to the tree of life. We learn all of the tarot, astrological, elemental, planetary correspondences. We learn the correspondences of herbs, we learn the correspondences of incense, of music, of colour, and so forth, and numerations to the tree of life, because it functions as our map so that we can resonate to reality as a way of navigating through reality through the art of correspondences, which is one of my definitions of magic. So let's take a look at how it affects us in the real world down at the bottom here. So the tarot cards are the Last Judgment, the Moon, and the World. And I'm going to put the one across the top, the Blasted Tower, which I'll show you in a second. Okay, so we have the Last Judgment, the World, and the Moon. We have Yetzirah here and Malkuth here. Now, what this is mapping is that the world is the world as you perceive it right now. So when you look around, we've got a relationship going on between Yetzirah, your psyche. So our psyche and all of our senses, our sensory apparatus that is perceiving the world, responding to it, to actual reality. Because as the Kabbalists say, Malkuth is in Kether. Malkuth is in Kether. So in effect, these are always the same. And the whole tree is an illusion in itself. It's just a map or a model that belongs down here, but it's our only way of seeing things. So in effect, this is Kether. This is actual reality. And we are only imaginary separated from it by the World card, by the World Tarot card. In a sense, that's the map of it. This is the world, and the world is a relationship of our perception of actual reality. But of course, we're pointing up the tree, so we have to go on this journey to discover what we knew right at the beginning, which is truth as it is right now, where we are. Now, we have the Last Judgment here, which is any decision that takes us into a new state, a micro moment of everything that is happening that is taking us into a new reality, a new rebirth, a final judgment on what was and ready to enter a new life. And the moon is a cyclic process that is constantly returning us round. And the blasted tower is sudden change. It's a destruction of the old model and the rebuilding of the new one. So at a micro level, this pattern, the Last Judgment, the moon and the world and the blasted tower, is going on every single Planck second, Planck constant moment. The smallest amount of time that you can possibly imagine is happening constantly. We're constantly doing things, or things are changing around us that is changing the current structure of everything, that is cycling around and then doing it again. And in the middle we have the world as we are sort of within it. And you can see that this is the starting point on the tree of life of the Zelator, and then the Theoricus, as we call it, starting to re-examine the nature of the world from a slightly different perspective. This is what initiation is all about, is moving through these grades back up the tree of life and learning the lessons and the models as we go up the tree. Now, I want to leave with a couple of interesting little points here, that in effect, when we put the Hebrew letters onto these tarot cards or paths, or in effect we put the tarot cards onto the paths that correspond to the Hebrew letters through the Sepher Yetzirah, the letter that corresponds to the moon is Kof, the letter that corresponds to the Last Judgment is Shin, and the letter that corresponds to the world is Tau. So we have three letters, Kof, Shin and Tau in Hebrew, and I've just put the transliterated English version, not the Hebrew characters, QShTh. And this is actually a Hebrew word, strangely enough, and it means rainbow or bow. So in effect, those three letters are describing the rainbow that is the covenant between the upper world and the lower world, that is the one that we can see. Whenever we look at a rainbow, we are looking at these three paths, Kof, Shin and Tau, QShTh, rainbow. Isn't that cool how that makes a fitting correspondence that we can derive some learning through? And the Golden Dawn actually said that the formula of QShTh was very important, and this is why. It's because it reminds us of this covenant that all things are always one thing, and that the rainbow bridge is there for us in effect to travel up the tree of life and remind ourselves of this unitative state, this state of unification that's present even in every existing moment. So that's QShTh, the rainbow on the bottom of the tree of life. Interestingly enough, the word Malkuth, or Malkuth, meaning kingdom, which has always been the word in Hebrew for kingdom, at the bottom of the tree of life is quite interesting as well, because it's made up of the letters M, L, K, Vau and Tau. And this is water. This is a goad. Kaf is the palm of the hand. Vau is a nail. And Tau in Hebrew, the actual letter, means cross. It's interesting just how the light has just shone across the video for that, so I'll just hold that up there. So Malkuth, if I just write those out again so that we can see them, Mem is water, like water that might be splashed on someone, a goad that might be used to hit someone, Kaf is the palm of the hand, Vau is a nail, and Tau means cross in Hebrew. So what sort of story or myth do we have that involves water, a goad, the palm of the hand, the nail and the cross? Isn't that interesting that the actual word Malkuth, meaning kingdom, contains within its own letters the central story, religious story of Christ on the cross. And that's built into the Hebrew letters themselves and always has been. So it's an interesting way of looking at the secrets of correspondence and the lessons that we can learn through the Tree of Life. And in following videos, I'm going to be talking about how we then see these as grades or steps to make the return journey up the path of the snake here, so that we can actually remind ourselves and lose our forgetfulness of the difference or illusory difference, the separation between Malkuth and QShTh, because Malkuth is in QShTh and QShTh is in Malkuth, but after another manner is what the Kabbalists say. So I hope you've enjoyed going on this quick journey up and down the Tree of Life. We're going to take a look at it in more detail. If you'd like me to discuss the history of Kabbalah, the academic study of Kabbalah, some of the traditional ideas in Kabbalah, both Lurianic or any of the other Sepher schools or the forms of thought regarding Kabbalah, perhaps going back to its origins in a more ecstatic form of mysticism, with the Occult school, with the sort of riding of the chariot and the many mansions idea, which is a far more almost shamanistic, trance-induced permutation of Hebrew letters to go on wild journeys up through the Tree of Life, which is where a lot of this has its pre-formulated existence. Then I'm happy to do that as well. Just drop a note in the comments, and if you've got any questions about Kabbalah, I'll be happy to answer them where I can. So this is a quick overview of the Tree of Life, and I'd like you to think, if you want to apply this to your life, about this formula of QShTh, the rainbow. What is it that you're constantly finding yourself doing? What is it that is constantly building up but then falling back down again? And what is something that you are trying to make a decision about in order to change your life or change something about your situation? And the tarot cards on those paths give you a model for being able to examine that and think about, if you're doing too much moon, then you need to do some last judgment. If you're doing too much last judgment, then you need to do some moon and exhaust it by cycling around it, and so forth. So this gives you a little model to apply to change and situations in your life. And that's perhaps a hint when we look at some of the later, more advanced topics, where we can use the Kabbalah and correspondences to map to the major arcana and the minor arcana, which are the 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s and 10s on the Tree of Life, and the court cards have a slightly different place in the structure. We can actually then take a look at, when you know these correspondences and when you learn them, when you know them intrinsically and off by heart, when you're doing a tarot card reading, you will automatically know if someone is in a particular situation on the Tree of Life where it's going to be out of balance. Like, for example, if they have the moon, then you know that they need a bit more last judgment and what that means in order to advise them from the reading itself, as where there are gaps or where there are breaks or where there's imbalance in the Tree of Life. And you can see that in the tarot card reading very clearly once you have this map and structure inside your brain. And this is one of the other useful applications of correspondences. It's important to both be able to apply correspondences and learn correspondences at the same time, because one is empty without the other. mere formulation, an empty ritual when you don't know why the symbolism is there, what the structure is, or anything else, is just lip service. And learning the correspondences and learning all of these facts and pieces of information is again just wallpapering the cell with the information, not realizing it's an actual escape plan and an escape route to escape the illusion and enter back into reality. Because knowledge for its own sake is dearth, it's empty, it's arising from other things, and it appears to be real, but it isn't even there in the first place. So we have to learn correspondence and apply it as well. So again, any questions from this brief introduction to the Tree of Life? I'm happy to answer them, and I look forward to seeing you in episode 6 of The Magician Explains, The Actual Magician Explains, when I'll possibly I think I'm going to be taking a look at the grade system then on the tree, now that we have an understanding of how the tree itself is built, or a foundational understanding at least. Again, any questions, just let me know. Thanks again. And I should leave you actually with the way we leave our members in our own magical order, which is the worker is hidden in the workshop. Thank you.